Hi everybody and welcome to our first flipped collab for our subject EDU30063 Teaching English, and this is the flipped collab for A1 report which is due in week 8. It's actually great to have a week 8 due date. It not only means it gives us plenty of time to sort of go through the assessment, but also a great thing about it is that you'll have 8 weeks worth of content that you will know by then. So you'll be really able to show us a deep understanding. You'll be able to have lots of access to the learning materials by then. Lots of springboards and DB discussions to draw on, chances to share with people, chances to share and chat with your ELA. So it's actually great to have a few weeks that we can really get the knowledge under our belts before we have to hand in our first assignment. So the way I've structured this flip collab is that it's Rachel's top 5 things that you need to know to get you started. Now, please don't use this as your only resource and reference. This is a very early week 2 that this is going out. So these are my thoughts on the assignment, having looked at it for the past 2 weeks, sort of broken it down. I can give you some ideas on where I think I would start and what I would include, but as we go through the unit more, I'm assuming that probably I'll get even more ideas. Some more things might come to light and I might say, oh, that would be great if we could add that in there, or this might be a better way to connect to curriculum. So please don't use this as your only resource. It's only a get you started, give you some ideas, get you thinking. Perhaps you might have more questions that get generated from this, which is absolutely great, because then you come to the interactive collab and you've already got your mindset on what questions you want to ask. Because sometimes after an hour of a interactive collab, you might not have any questions, but then you might go away and think of them later. So this is a way of just to get you thinking about the report, questions you might have, and things to get you started so that you can start thinking about what you want to include now. You might want to start thinking about which assessments you want to choose, what kind of assessments can you choose. So all of those things I'm going to answer for you today. But please make sure that you're accessing the Padlet. Please make sure you either come to the interactive collab or listen to the recording, because I'm assuming I'll probably have even more ideas on things we could include by then. So this is Rachel's top 5 things you need to know just to get started. Okay, so my first slide says, what is literacy? Discuss, impact, and connect to the curriculum. So if you have a look at the report structure, you will notice that within the introduction as well as the findings, we are going to both introduce the concept of literacy, and we're going to define this whole I suppose, broad umbrella of what modern day literacy is. So what my advice to you is at this stage is to really connect back with those week 1 readings and think about how broad the definition of literacy has become. So we've probably moved on. As much as we want to say that literacy is obviously about reading and writing and speaking and listening, as you can note here in this this little quote that I've taken from Akara, we do want to say that it is reading, writing, speaking and listening, but we also want to talk about some of the ideas that have been embedded in our week 1 module, which is connecting to the fact that we have all these socio-cultural constructs that now link to literacy, and we think about how we use literacy in sort of a 21st century environment. So think about all the, we are preparing kids for this 21st century world, and we think about how, we have to send text messages and we have to communicate via email, and we need to be able to access bills online. So there's so many things within just our society that we have to be literate. I suppose, if we think back 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, that there wasn't that need, that really essential need to be literate like there is these days. And then we think about that broader concept of literacy too, where we need to be critical thinkers and we need to decipher this huge multi-literacies that we have sort of bombarding us on a day-to-day life. It's not like years ago where we just had books and newspapers. We now have digital print, and so many, we're constantly interpreting both digital and visual media, and how that needs to encompass being literate as well. So we're really thinking about literacy as quite the broad construct. We've got the academic elements that we need to know, but also within that sort of socio-cultural constructs that we talked about within week 1. So when you're defining literacy within your little bit in the introduction, but also in your findings, you're really connecting to that sort of idea. Even within, it says to connect to the curriculum. So use the curriculum sort of as a basis, because it shows you what's important and what is valued, because that's what makes it into the curriculum. If critical literacy wasn't valued, then it wouldn't be included. So it says literacy is fundamental to students' ability to learn at school and to engage proactively in society. Very, very important. Links to week 1. Look through your week 1 readings and use them to develop this concept. Students become literate as they develop the skills, knowledge, skills, dispositions to interpret and use language confidently for learning and communicating in and out of school. And you're participating in society. That's what we're talking about here, being able to do the things that you need to do to function. It involves the reading and the writing, but it's also about creating that oral, print, visual, digital text, using and modifying language for different purposes and a range of contexts. We're using language in so much more different ways, and kids need to know the difference between literate language as a part of formal writing and oral language as a part of a conversation in a professional manner, or down at the footy club. We're using literacy in so many different ways. So within that section, I suggest that you connect to what literacy is in terms of socio-cultural, multimodal, 21st century, and think about the fact that it's more than just reading and writing and what it encompasses. We also need to discuss using the chosen curriculum document and other supporting literature. So it just means use curriculum, use evidence from academic resources to discuss the impact that literacy teaching has on children's learning. So let's, like a thing that automatically sprung to mind to me was, Hattie's research into the impact that teachers have on their classroom, and it's the number one, that it all comes down to the teacher and the impact that the teacher can have on effective literacy teaching. Think about all those things that you suggested to us in week 1 about what makes an English teacher. They have to be knowledgeable, they have to be passionate, they have to be able to differentiate their instruction, they've got to use assessment effectively. So all of these things are going to impact. We need teachers to be able to do these things, because then they'll have a positive impact on literacy learning. And it really comes down to the fact that the teacher is the most critical component to being successful in literacy. And because we've got this concept of literacy that's so broad and it encompasses so many things, it shows that we need literacy to be able to be successful in life. Therefore, we need excellent teachers to make us literate, because there's so much writing on it in terms of life success. More about this will be discussed at the interactive collab. I can't talk all of the things I would like to say about it now, but we just need to get our heads around what literacy is and the broader components of it, and the fact that literacy teachers make a huge impact to kids' learning development. Number 2 is choose 2 literacy assessments. I know the first questions are going to be, what year level do they have to be for? Where do they have to be from? And all of those sorts of things. So let's get into that. It can be any grade level. It can be from either reading, writing, or speaking, listening. However, I'd probably err away from speaking and listening assessments, because I find that there's just not enough information about them, but that's completely up to you. And it can be something formative, it can be something summative, it can be something that you've got a special interest in, it can be something that lends itself better to your qualification. It is completely up to you. It might be something that you've already used in a prac, it might be something that is totally brand new to you because you want to learn more about it. The door's really open for you to choose whatever you like in that regard. They don't have to be ones that match up. You could have one assessment could be for an older cohort of kids, perhaps upper primary school, and your other one could be more a foundation entry to school sort of assessment. So they don't need to be compared against one another, but they will be critiqued on their own merits. So the great thing about that is that it's quite open, and that you can choose ones that you're interested in and that suits what you want to get out of this assessment, I suppose. Now, what we do need to do as a part of the findings section is to discuss the key benefits and implications of your chosen assessments. Now, I've dealt with literacy assessment in this unit, the old version of this unit, I should say, and we did look quite extensively at assessment last time. And I suppose my main thing that seems to come up a lot when you're looking at benefits, and they use the word implications. So I'm assuming that's the same thing as limitations. So I will confirm that for you with our lead UC just to make sure that I'm advising you on the correct content. But when we're looking at benefits and limitations of literacy assessments, we need to make sure that we're being really explicit about what our benefits and limitations are. So the purpose of effective literacy assessment is to give the teacher data that you can use to drive your teaching and to differentiate for your students and to take a learner who is at a particular step with their learning and then move them to the next step, like a coach would in basketball. So if they look at you and they know that you're up to a particular point with your shooting or with your dribbling, they know exactly what that next step is. Well, that's what we need to be like with our literacy assessment. We need to have an assessment that gives us information that we can use to take learning to the next step. So I've done this on PAT-R comprehension. I've taken the benefits and potential limitations and I've just done a quick brainstorm for you. Now you can see that I've done things that are really explicit about the quality of the data that PAT-R comprehension provides. So I didn't say things like, it was easy to photocopy, or I could easily give it to a parent to do, or it was quick, it didn't take a lot of time, or kids can annoy you during this assessment. So all of those sorts of things that I've just mentioned are irrelevant. The fact that you have to do this assessment and there could potentially be 30 other kids in the grade sitting around you is irrelevant to the quality of the data that the assessment produces. So make sure you focus on what information does this assessment provide me? What's the quality of the data? Does it give me something that I can actually sit down and say, hey, now that I've done this assessment, I can see that the child needs to do A, B, and C. Does it give you a starting point or a next step with that student? So with PAT-R, I had a look at it, and the things that I liked about it, which are data driven, is I really liked the fact that you could directly assess different aspects of comprehension. Comprehension is huge. There's so many different components of it, and I want to know what students know in terms of using the different strategies. So it had things like retrieving directly stated information. So if I know that a kid can get a text and take out directly stated information, then I can tick off literal comprehension. Can they reflect on text? Can they interpret information and make inferences? It tells me whether they can or can't, and if they can't, that's my next step with my learning. is to perhaps reteach inference to kids A, B, and C that didn't get, I can form those fluid groups using my assessment data. So I liked the way it broke down the assessments into different elements of comprehension. I really liked the way there was a short amount of text and reading for easier interpretation. So it wasn't a hugely long assessment. The little grabs of text that students need to be able to read were quite short. So I thought it's not going to be really fatiguing to the students to have to read large slabs of text and potentially, tune out or not want to do it. And the scores were connected to year levels. There were spreadsheets that could be analysed. I really liked the way there was an element looking at vocab. I know that Pat have a whole nother vocabulary test, which could be something you could look at, but I did like that. It informs teachers of what areas of reading comprehension they can inform for their planning, and you can then track, because you're given a grade level, you could track across grade levels as well, which would be good for cohorts of kids. I'm just going through these very quickly. Obviously, with your assessment, you'll break it down in more detail. A limitation could be that with multiple choice, you've got the potential to guess, so it might not be as accurate as perhaps short answer. A short answer assessment could be probably more indicative in terms of not having that element of chance. There could be a need for teacher assistance, so it's not very straightforward. I know with a test like Probe, you sit with the child, they read to you, and they just answer some questions. So that sort of setup could be more straightforward. There would be less sort of elements of confusion for the child. It does not assess all aspects of comprehension. So remember back here I said that I liked that it stated the directly stated information and making inferences, but it doesn't assess ability to visualize or predict or some of the other comprehension strategies. So remember we said we were looking at good benefits and limitations. So something that's not like, so it would have a lot of photocopying. That's not a great example of a limitation. That's not a limitation that tells me about the quality of the data. So make sure you're focused. You need to choose two. We'll talk more about how it's structured, and we'll talk more about how you're going to write about it in the interactive collab. But just for now, start thinking about what your two could be, and maybe even brainstorm some benefits and limitations. And even before you choose what your assessments are going to be, maybe do a Google search and see that there's actually info out there. Because I know sometimes people choose an assessment and then they say to me, oh, such a hard assessment. I looked and looked and looked, and I even asked teachers, and I did this and I did that, and I couldn't find information about it. So maybe make sure that the information is out there, and if you can find lots, and then you decide, yep, that's going to be my choice. Okay, so your next one is to identify factors and potential effects on learning. This is another part of the findings. So with these ones, we're still focusing on the two assessments. We're not talking about just literacy assessment in general. This is still identify factors that contribute to the use of the assessments we chose, that you just chose on the slide previous. So then sit back. Whether you want to do this separately or whether you combine it in a paragraph, even I haven't quite thought about what would work best for me if I was going to write it myself. We'll talk more about that in the interactive collab. But you need to think about, there's always factors at play with assessment, and things that teachers perhaps need to consider that could influence how effective the assessment is. So I've just done a little brainstorm myself and thought about, even when we were talking about Pat R previously, and I was talking about, the way it's sort of structured with little multiple choice, I suppose very similar to NAPLAN in a way. There's an element of confusion there. So that's a factor. I said that Probe was more, I suppose, straightforward to administer because you do have that sort of question and answer. So there could be structural things. So I've written here format and structure of the assessment could be a factor in how perhaps effective it is. Other factors that you'd need to consider would be things like, I've written, oh dear, I've just skipped to the next slide. Sorry, guys. Access to materials. So if it's an online, say something like an online reading assessment, does everyone have a laptop? Does the school have internet connection? I mean, here where I am, there's also element of cultural bias and sort of socio-cultural elements that you may have to consider as a factor of your assessment. So there could be things like perhaps I've written there comprehension of experiences. So one thing that popped to mind was, say, with the probe comprehension, there's one called going to the beach, and they might have language in there such as spade or shovel or things that perhaps the kids who haven't had the experience of going to the beach or have other cultural or socio-economic or socio-cultural elements that come into play when you're delivering the assessment, because it could be an impact on the assessment if you have certain language or certain sort of terms and things that you're not used to. Doesn't mean that you can't comprehend in the sense of understanding what you're reading when there's words in there that you might just not have experience with. So as well as thinking about factors that could contribute to the, I suppose, effectiveness of the assessment, you also need to consider the potential effects on children's learning. So it says, report on the potential effects of the assessments in relation to children's learning development in the English curriculum in a primary context. So when I had to think about this myself, I thought, what could be some potential effects on children's learning? I suppose for the majority you could talk about the positives, but given that this is, and when we have a look at the rubric, this will become more clear, but it's not supposed to just be a discussion or an explanation on what's good about these particular assessments. It is supposed to be a critical analysis. So you really do the whole way through when you're looking at benefits and limitations of your two assessments, when you're thinking about factors, when you're thinking about effects on children's learning, that you are being critical and you're looking at sort of all avenues of what makes literacy assessment effective. So I've got some positives, so some positive effects that I could see. If your literacy assessment is effective, and this is going to relate to your particular assessments. Mine are a little bit general here, but you'll be able to make yours much more tailored. The biggest positive that I could think of was the clarity in terms of differentiation. So we need to be able to differentiate in our classroom, in our planning, to cater for student need. How are we going to do that? Well, we need to have effective literacy assessment that tells us, remember we're talking about that being data driven and being able to have an assessment that gives us information that we need. So once we have that information, and if the assessment has been effective and it's been able to give us the insight into what kids know, then we're able to better differentiate our program. Then we're better able to cater to kids' needs. Then we're better able to have those fluid groupings. Then we're better able to choose teaching strategies that match up with what kids need. We're better able to plan our pedagogy and have collaborations with people and have students working together and self-assessing, and all of those sorts of things sort of come together when we have that clarity about what kids know. So we need an effective assessment that gives us the insight and not just gives us very broad, we could be critical of assessments that don't give us that really specific insight, because if it's just telling you a number, this particular child got 24 out of 30. Well, what does that mean? How am I going to use that to tell me what this next stage is with their learning? When we're thinking about literacy theory and we're thinking about all of those different stages of literacy theory, in terms of literacy development, you know, with those emergent, early emergent, beginning, all those stages that kids go through with their literacy, particularly in the foundation to year 2 levels, we need to be able to know exactly where they are on that scale, what they need to know next. We've got the curriculum there, but where are these students? We can't assume that everyone in grade 2 is working at grade 2. So we need effective assessment to tell us exactly where everybody is. So that's the potential effect on learning, is that student learning will increase because the teacher will have a greater insight into how to cater to their needs and how to differentiate their program, especially for them. We can get kids set up with their working goals, their learning goals, so that they have greater insight into their own learning, and then you've got that student voice, student agency, student taking on their own learning, which is a big thing, especially in Victoria and our Western region at the moment. And then there's clarity for teachers around curriculum areas. So if your assessment provides some really great insights into reading, we can connect it back to the curriculum and really understand better what we need to teach next. Like I said, we're thinking with our critical hat on, so there will be potential downsides and perhaps negative impacts and negative effects on children's learning if the assessment is not giving us the data that we need. And doing my master's at the moment in reading intervention, and I found a lot of the reading science stuff really interesting because it talks a lot about running records and some people being quite critical of those, and talking about MSVQing systems and how they're not effective in teaching kids what strategies they need to use. So there are a lot of interesting discussions around assessment in literacy, and not all positive, not all having positive effects on children's learning. So really, to push yourself up into that HD section, you really need to think about all of the elements and have that critical analysis. I know I've sort of just spoken about these quickly, but we'll talk about them more in our interactive collab. My next one is part 4, make recommendations. In the findings section, the last dot point, you will say that you need to include recommendations for policies and teaching practices for the assessment of English curriculum in the primary school context. Now, you'll notice that I've got make recommendations which include inclusive policies and specific teaching strategies. If you're wondering where I got that particular statement from, that is from our rubric. So if you have a look at the rubric in the HD section, you'll notice that it says that in order to make that a HD, you need to have not just recommendations, but recommendations which include inclusive policies and connection to specific teaching strategies. So this part, I envision it being a little bit more general. I hope you agree with me when you come to read that too. When you're talking about the factors and when you're talking about the potential effects, I see within the way it's written in the assessment details, it links to the 2 assessments that you're talking about. This could also link to your 2 assessments when you make recommendations, but I think it also needs to just sort of encompass and tie all of the information together in terms of what makes literacy assessment effective. And, you know, we started off the report talking about that concept of literacy and how broad it is and how big it is and how important it is. So we want to make some recommendations about the broader concepts of literacy too. So literacy, these are just things that I just brainstormed, things that I thought were important, definitely not an exhaustive list, and we'll talk more about recommendations in the interactive collab. But you've got assessment should be data driven to inform your teaching. I mean, that's the number one that I've talked about the whole way through this report, and even in the old subject before things got changed up, that was always the drive, that assessment needs to give you the insight into what kids need to know so that you can take them to the next step with their learning. Literacy assessment should be inclusive of all needs, which links to dot point number 3. Literacy assessment should provide insight to better differentiate tasks. So when you have effective assessment, you will have a greater insight into what kids know so that you can be inclusive of all of their needs. There could be some policies. Look for Education Department policy documents talking about the importance of inclusion, the importance of differentiation. I'll see what I can find and add to the Padlet in terms of policies around that. But there will be departmental policies talking about how it is our job of teachers to differentiate and be inclusive of need. So if we know that a student has a particular need, how can we structure our assessment a little bit differently in order to cater for that particular need? All of these sort of link together, so apologies for jumping around a bit. Literacy assessment should be varied, timely, and provides students feedback. So you can have a look at feedback, which is which is very important. An effective literacy assessment provides evidence to allow for curriculum adjustments and ILPs. So we talk about the fact that we did an assessment, it was great, it gave us so much data about what the kid could do, where we're going to take them to next with their learning. So not everyone in grade 6 is at grade 6 level, not everyone at grade 2 is at grade 2 level, so we have to make adjustments. So there was departmental policy, I think it was under Victorian Department of Ed, I'll get the link for you, that talked about making adjustments. So the fact that you need to adjust curriculum or just adjust even classroom strategies. Remember, it says here to link to specific teaching strategies. So has the assessment provide you insight into how you're going to use your pedagogy, how you're going to use your teaching strategies to better cater to that particular student? If you know you're being inclusive of their needs, if you know that, if we've got let's say, for an example, a child with ADHD, we don't want them to be independent reading for an hour. That's not being inclusive of their needs. That's not providing them with the best approach for them, perhaps. What other specific teaching strategies would best suit their needs? Now, you're not going to enter into that kind of specific example, but I'm just raising it with you as an idea to connect need and assessment and differentiation and those teaching strategies together. This has been a lot to take in, very understandably. Like I said, I'm sure I'll still have little brainwaves of things I think you can include along the way. So definitely check the Padlet and interactive COLLAB links for further clarification and ideas. So we've made it to the top 5, and it was just the fact that you've got referencing and formatting as always a part of our rubric. So it is something that you're being assessed on. So you don't just say, "Oh, I can't be bothered doing APA," because then you're being, that's a great way to get extra marks, and making sure that you're getting a good mark for that sets you up with your other areas. We'll talk more at the interactive COLLAB about the structure and how I sort of envisioned things sort of flowing. I haven't had too much time to reflect on that yet, and we don't have old samples or anything we can look at to see how people have done it. So if you've got ideas, share them with us on the DB. We do have an executive summary, which is a very short 100 words to get you started talking about a short, sharp summary of the whole report. We then have your introduction, your findings, and conclusion. You need at least 10 references, use APA, and it's a strong focus on your own personal literacy. Now, I have made this template, and I'm going to give you a copy of it in the Padlet. So I understand that you can't see it terribly well here, but there's a copy that you can access in the Padlet. So all I've done is I've taken the rubric and I've broken it down into its sections. And the reason why I've done that is because I just wanted you to see the difference between what it means to pass and what it means to get a HD, for example, and the road to that and what's different. So for example, when you have a look at concepts of literacy have been defined as a pass, all you've done is talked about it. All you've done is defined literacy. You haven't added any sort of extra discussion or had that critical element. Look at the HD. This is the difference. The concepts of literacy have been discussed just as they have as a pass, but you can see the difference here is that critical discussion, that critical analysis of what it means to be literate in the 21st century, not just saying literacy is blah, blah, and blah. Sorry, I'll just go back. I've just clicked off that again. If you have a look here at understanding, you can see it says basic discussion of the key points of literacy assessment compared to a comprehensive or extensive discussion. We'll talk more about that on the interactive collab as well, and you can have a look at it yourself in the Padlet. Now, just before I go, I just wanted to say that this is the normal flipped collab. Everybody needs to watch this one. I will make a shorter one just talking about a couple of the extra elements that specialization students need to access. So everyone needs to watch this one. If you are doing specialization, you need to watch both. I'm not going to talk about the actual assignment again. I'm just going to talk about what specialization students need to know that they need to add in extra in their findings. So specialization students, you can now listen to your specialization flipped collab extra. Have a good day, everyone, and I'll see you in the interactive collab.